Have you ever heard of a war where the two opposing leaders respected each other so much they became legends? That's the story of the Third Crusade, a clash of civilizations, a tale of ambition, and most famously, a duel of wits and will between two of history's most iconic figures, Richard the Lionheart and Saladin Al-Ayyubi. Buckle up, because we're about to journey back to the 12th century, to a holy war that was anything but simple. Our story begins not with a roar, but with a crushing defeat. In 1187, the formidable Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, a man renowned for his chivalry as much as his military genius, achieves his life's ambition. At the Battle of Hattin, he annihilates the army of the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem, which had been in Christian hands for nearly a century, surrenders to him shortly after. For the Muslim world, it was a moment of glorious triumph. For Christian Europe, it was a catastrophe. The news of Jerusalem's fall sent shockwaves across the continent. Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade, a holy expedition to reclaim the sacred city. The three most powerful monarchs in Europe answered the call: the aging but legendary Emperor Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, the cunning King Philip Augustus of France, and the man whose name would become synonymous with this crusade, King Richard I of England, better known as Richard the Lionheart. The stage was set for an epic confrontation. However, the crusade got off to a rocky start. Frederick Barbarossa, leading a massive German army, tragically drowned while crossing a river in Anatolia, his mighty force largely disintegrated, a huge blow to the Crusaders before they even reached the Holy Land. This left the two remaining kings, Philip and Richard, to lead the charge. And let's just say they were not the best of friends. Their rivalry was legendary. Philip was calculating and political, while Richard was a brilliant, hot-headed warrior, arguably the greatest military commander of his age. They were rivals in France, and they brought that tension with them to the Holy Land. Their first major joint operation was the Siege of Acre, a vital port city that had been under siege by Crusader forces for 2 long, grueling years. The arrival of Richard and Philip with their fresh armies and advanced siege equipment finally tipped the scales. Richard, in particular, was a force of nature. He was often seen on the front lines, personally directing the siege engines and inspiring his men with his sheer bravery. Despite being struck down by a fever, he reputedly had himself carried on a stretcher to shoot at the city walls with a crossbow. In July 1191, after a heroic defense, Acre finally surrendered. It was a massive victory, but the cracks between the leaders were already showing. Shortly after the fall of Acre, King Philip, citing ill health and urgent matters back home, decided to pack up and leave. He left a portion of his army, but his departure meant Richard was now the undisputed commander of the Third Crusade. This was both a blessing and a curse. He had full command, but he also bore the full weight of responsibility. It was here, after the victory at Acre, that one of the most controversial and brutal events of the crusade occurred. Frustrated with the slow pace of prisoner exchange negotiations with Saladin, and fearing the prisoners would slow his march, Richard made a ruthless decision. He ordered the execution of nearly 3,000 Muslim prisoners. It was a shocking act of brutality that stood in stark contrast to Saladin's clemency when he had taken Jerusalem. It showed the world that the Lionheart had a cold, pragmatic side to his chivalrous reputation. With Acre secured, Richard began his march south along the coast, his ultimate goal being Jerusalem. Saladin's army shadowed him the entire way, harassing his column with skirmishes and raids. Saladin's strategy was to wear Richard down, to lure him into a trap. But Richard was too disciplined a commander. He maintained a tight formation, his infantry protecting the flanks while the cavalry stayed ready in the center. The inevitable showdown came on September 7, 1191. Near a place called Arsef, Saladin launched an all-out assault, hoping to break the Crusader lines. For hours, Richard's army endured a relentless barrage of arrows and chaotic charges. Richard rode up and down the lines, holding his men together, refusing to let his knights charge prematurely. Finally, when the moment was right, when the enemy was committed and slightly disorganized, he unleashed his heavy cavalry. The charge of the Crusader knights was devastating. It shattered Saladin's army, forcing them to flee the field. The Battle of Arsef was a clear tactical victory for Richard. He had proven he could defeat the legendary Saladin in an open battle. Following the victory, Richard captured the port of Jaffa, securing his supply line. Now, Jerusalem was within his grasp. He marched his army inland, getting so close that his scouts could see the holy city's towers. But this is where the Lionheart's momentum stalled. The weather turned foul, winter rains turning the land into a muddy swamp. His supply lines were stretched thin, and Saladin's forces were constantly raiding his foraging parties. More importantly, Richard realized something crucial. Even if he could capture Jerusalem, he couldn't hold it. Most of the Crusaders would want to return home after fulfilling their vow, leaving a small garrison to be inevitably overwhelmed by Saladin's vast resources. Twice he marched on Jerusalem, and twice he was forced to turn back. It was a bitter pill to swallow for a man who lived for glory. Throughout this entire campaign, a strange and fascinating relationship developed between Richard and Saladin. They never met face to face, but they communicated through envoys, and a deep, mutual respect grew between them. they were worthy adversaries. When Richard fell ill with a fever, Saladin sent him fresh fruit and ice to help him recover. When Richard's horse was killed in battle, Saladin, hearing of it, sent him to magnificent replacements, stating that it was not right for a king to fight on foot. These acts of chivalry have become legendary, painting a picture of a war fought by honorable men. But make no mistake, it was still a brutal, bloody conflict. Yet this mutual respect allowed them to do what seemed impossible: negotiate. With Richard needing to return to England to deal with his brother John's plotting, and Saladin's empire weary of constant warfare, both sides were ready for a truce. In September 1192, they signed the Treaty of Jaffa. The treaty was a compromise. The Crusaders would keep control of a narrow strip of coastline from Acre to Jaffa. Most importantly, Christian pilgrims were guaranteed safe passage to visit the holy sites in Jerusalem, which would remain under Muslim control. For Richard, it was a failure to achieve his main goal, but a success in securing a future for the Crusader states. For Saladin, it was a victory in keeping Jerusalem, the crowning jewel of his life's work. Richard the Lionheart sailed for home shortly after, but his journey was far from over. He was shipwrecked, captured, and held for a massive ransom. He would eventually return to his kingdom, but he would never see the Holy Land again. Saladin, the great unifier of the Muslim world, died just a few months after Richard's departure in 1193, mourned throughout his empire. So, who won the Third Crusade? It's not a simple question. Militarily, Richard won the key battles, but strategically he failed to capture Jerusalem. Saladin lost those battles, but he successfully defended his greatest prize. Perhaps the real legacy of the Third Crusade isn't about a winner or a loser. It's the incredible story of these two larger-than-life figures, Richard and Saladin, a Christian king and a Muslim sultan, enemies on the battlefield, but brothers in the code of chivalry. Their contest became a legend that has echoed through the centuries, a reminder that even in the midst of war, there can be respect, honor, and a shared humanity. Thanks for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please hit that like button, and consider subscribing for more stories from our incredible past. Let me know in the comments which historical rivalry you'd like to see covered next. Until then, stay curious.